Good morning and welcome to Dynamic Dialogue. Today we're going to talk about skills for recovery. This is a weekly offering extended through June by Purple Link. We are looking at thoughts, challenges, ideas related to the supply chain, and we'll take questions, share resources and lessons learned, do a short presentation, and then we'll have, we open it up for questions. You can use the chat, and this link is good through June, actually. So we have several factors driving our environment, as we well know. COVID-19, coronavirus, all of those things that we didn't know in January and now are part of our daily conversation. So we're in the middle of this. We've been in it for a few months, and now we've got the next few months to go through. So everything I read, everything that I've researched says we're in this for the next few months. This is not a one and done kind of thing. So even as we move into recovery, as organizations reopen, and as a lot of things get better, we're still going to have to deal with COVID-19. We know that we have a lot of globalization, market interconnectedness. We have a lot of suppliers all over the world, especially in Asia, but we also have markets in Asia that are important for companies, for US companies, especially those markets in India and China, just by virtue of the populations in those two countries. But Asia is not only a big supply base, but it's also a big market. We have a lot of challenges with cybersecurity today. Here we are on a Zoom meeting. If you're like me, many of you are on Zoom meetings several times a day. And we've seen all kinds of challenges from just the internet being kind of slow, working from home when everyone in the house is on the internet, or the neighbors on the internet, and everything is a little bit different. And everyone is using a lot of virtual things. So the cybersecurity is now more important than ever. It's important for companies who are doing a lot to beef up the security as people work from home and work remotely, and that's going to continue. We need more skills for procuring goods and services. The standard transactional skills are good and those are needed, but those are just the basics. And what supply chain needs right now is higher and deeper and broader skills. And we're going to talk about some of those. Things like blockchain and cloud computing, things that supply chain people didn't really pay that much attention to until the last couple of years, now are more and more on the forefront. And as we move into recovery and relook at the architecture of our supply chains, it's going to be more and more important than ever. And there's less talent available and more companies searching. So there are a lot of people who are in the mood now to change jobs for whatever reason, and companies continue to search. The Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, which is called CIPS, has found that 56% of organizations are struggling to find the right skills and experience for their positions. So as a manager in the corporate world, I was always looking for talent. Even when I didn't have open recs, I was looking for talent, because when I could get an open rec or when one came up, I wanted to be able to hire the right people. So knowing what skills are needed is very important. So there are 5 basic supply chain skills sought, and these are not really skills in and of themselves, but these are areas of skills. The first is procurement. Supply chain and procurement often go hand in hand, but it often is aligned with either planning, production, it's aligned with logistics. So whatever picture comes into your mind when you hear supply chain, one of the aspects of that that's very important is procurement. So that acquisition of goods and services is very, very important. The other one is more general operations, all of the functions, all of the activities that go to support procurement, all of the planning, all of the production, the customer service, the logistics piece of that, anything else within the organization that is needed in order to acquire those goods and services. And I talk about procurement especially because procurement is such a big part of the material spend these days. Companies spend up to 70% of their direct material dollars on buying parts and subassemblies. So it's very important to an organization to have the suppliers and that part of the supply chain very well managed. So we have procurement, we have operations, because most companies make something, whether it's a good or a service, and they deliver that, they need these procurement skills to go with that. We have basic business acumen skills, basic finance, accounting type things. How do you calculate overhead costs? How do you calculate profit? There's some basic quality, lean, Six Sigma skills that are in there. So there's a wide range of business acumen skills. And then there's what I call the teamwork, the ability to work with others. On a supply chain, it's a chain because it has so many links in it. If you can't work all up and down that chain, then your company's going to be at a disadvantage and you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I call these skills teamwork, but they're way more than just teamwork skills. They're collaboration. It's the ethics, which is a very integral part of what we do in supply chain. It's diversity skills. It's being socially and politically correct in how you conduct your work. And it's also strategic thinking, the big picture thinking, being able to grasp the context of ideas and activities within your function and extended from that function, and being proactive in order with that. So let's take a little bit deeper dive at some of these. In procurement, we have things like MRP and ERP competence. Whether your company uses spreadsheets or sophisticated Oracle and SAP modules, you need to be competent with handling an MRP, understanding what the requisitions being driven are, what the requirements are, and how that's being done is very important. All of those systems, even spreadsheets, have a lot of different information that has to be maintained. Just basic part numbers, lead times, supplier qualifications, a lot of other information that's very basic, very important for acquisition skills. Market research is also very important. Being able to find new suppliers in a reasonable amount of time, being able to bring them on board, and add them to the supply base is very important. And knowing what's going on in the market, in the industry market, and where you're purchasing parts is very important as well. Negotiation and collaboration, very different approaches to making the deal, but that's what we're trying to do in procurement skills, is to buy and sell. So we're trying to get the right deal for our company by negotiating, by collaborating. Several different ways we can do this, and professionals need to have skills in that. Basic skills for requisition, handling, purchase order processing, managing those purchase orders, getting the parts delivered. Basic management of supplier, knowing how to contact them, knowing how to update deliveries and cost and all of those kinds of things. How to issue bids, how to accept bids back, how to make a supplier selection. Inventory is another big area for procurement to manage. Inventory skills are very important because you don't want to have too much or too little. I always say we are the Goldilocks people. We are trying to do the just right area. We want to have just enough inventory to do what we need to do to produce what we need to produce with some flexibility, but we don't want to have too much. So, and we want to have the cost just right and the delivery just right. All of these things have to kind of manage. So we're the Goldilocks function. In inventory management is really important from a financial perspective, because inventory is an asset. It is a short-term asset, and the other big short-term asset that companies have is cash. So from the financial perspective, you have inventory and you have cash, and people would rather have inventory or to build things with, but finance would rather have cash because it's much more liquid and it's easy to spend. So other skills we need in procurement: being able to prepare contracts, manage those contracts, close those contracts out, whether it's a basic contract that's a purchase order or a very detailed multi-page document that has to be negotiated, prepared, and then managed throughout the life of the contract and eventually closed out. You need to know how to do some spend analysis. You need to be able to look at some data and make some analysis and to track how well we're doing. You need to be able to convert data to information. The more data we have today, it seems like the less information we have. So if you have an MRP, ERP system, you have a lot of data, and the trick is really to turn that data into usable information that we can use to make sure that we're on track as an organization, to make sure that we're meeting the goals that we need to make sure that we're making the progress to the initiatives that we have, and that we're managing the business correctly. And then for managing performance of suppliers, you need performance. For managing suppliers, you need to be able to manage their performance. How are they doing as cost, quality, delivery, and several other factors we'll look at. How are they doing? How are you managing the relationship with that organization? And do they have risk that they're adding to your supply chain, or are you helping to manage the risk in your company through those suppliers? So you want to look at those things. Operation skills include production capabilities for producing whatever you are producing and whatever you are asking your suppliers to produce. You need to understand the capabilities. You need to be able to do that capability assessment as you select suppliers so that you can choose the right suppliers. Capabilities are not the same as capacity. Capacity is how much you can get into that sack. Is it a 5-pound sack, a 10-pound sack, or a 20-pound sack? You need to be able to assess that. You need to be able to make sure that you're not overloading or underloading a supplier. Again, it goes back to that Goldilocks thing. We want the just right amount. We don't want to strain our suppliers' capacity, but we don't want to give them so little that they ignore us as a customer. Sales and operations planning, S&OP, basic skills, need to have those in to be able to work in the supply chain today. That goes along with demand management, understanding where the demand is coming from. Is it forecast? Is it customer orders? How are you scheduling those? How are you forecasting those? Again, forecasting, it's very important that people know forecasting not only from what the company that we work for is forecasting to our customers, but how we turn that forecast into a forecast for our suppliers, for our supply base. It's very important that we do that as well. Blueprint reading, still a very basic skill, but one a lot of people don't have, and it's one that you really need to work in procurement. You need to know some basics of statistical process control. You need to know what control charts are. You need to understand capability analysis. You don't need to be able to do the calculations, but you need to be able to ask a supplier for that, and you need to be able to understand what it means when you get those numbers back from them. And you need to know the difference between variable and attribute data. Variable data is things that you measure. You control chart those with X-bar charts, mean charts. And then attribute data is things that typically you count, like they're visual things, maybe scratches or dents. And those you count over time and look at those. And those control charts are P charts and C charts. And if you don't understand these things, these are good things to make notes of, and you can go do some homework on this. And if you'd like more information, you can always contact me. Lean manufacturing is all about getting the waste out, all about doing things smoothly. I tell my students at CSUN that operations wants to produce a certain amount of supply to meet the demand in a nice, smooth fashion. We want this nice amount of demand satisfaction coming through our factory. We want to create the supply that meets that demand in a nice, smooth, even fashion with not much waste. And lean means taking the waste out of everything. We want to be you want to understand just in time. Just in time is a great concept. During COVID now, it's been a little bit different. Some companies who were operating on a just in time philosophy have found out that maybe wasn't enough inventory, and they had some starts and stops with inventory and maybe some shutdowns, disruptions. So you need to understand the basics of the just in time philosophy, understand what works for you and for your company, and figure out what applications work. This is not a suitable philosophy for every application that every company is using. So, get to the next slide. Oops, there we go. Business acumen. This is general business skills. Things like understanding gross and net profit margins, how your company calculates those, what goes in there, what are your requirements, margin expectations, understanding that for your company, understanding that with your suppliers. So when you ask for a cost model with your suppliers, you want to understand what their overheads are, what their direct costs are, what their margins are. You want to be able to understand the costs that go into overheads. There's fixed costs, there's variable costs, there's direct costs. There's the overhead is the supplies, it's the management of things, it's a lot of the support areas. So you want to understand how those relate to both labor and material in your organization, because it's very important that you understand what goes into that so you can manage your own business within the supply chain. It's also important, again, in procurement is especially important to understand ethics. What are the ethics of your company? What are the ethics of our communities? What are the ethics of the companies that we're working with, and the ethics of the countries that we're working in when we have suppliers and customers in other areas? They may not all align, and it's very important to make sure that you stay true to the ethics of your company, the ethics of your country, but most importantly, your own personal ethics. That's the one that you have to make sure is aligned with everything else. And that extends into social responsibility. It also, which is looking at what initiatives are important to your company and how does that work and how do you extend that. One thing I really look at, because I have a background as a manufacturing engineer, is safety. So I've done a lot of business in Asia. I've spent a lot of time at suppliers in Asia. And when I'm there, I'm always looking at safety and safety aspects. So it's very important to me to make sure that these companies are taking care of their workers and not adding risk into the whole manufacturing process, which is innately risky anyway. Sustainability is another one that aligns again with social responsibility. What is your own personal, your company, your community stance on sustainability? Reuse, recycle, and reduce numbers of parts. Those are all good things to go by. How rigid you are on those, how strict you are, depends on a lot of things. And part of what it depends on is the rules and laws and regulations, which goes into compliance. So you've got to make sure that you're meeting the compliance requirements, your company is, your suppliers are, and that compliance gets crazy when you get into government contracting and some of that. But you have to make sure that you understand what the requirements are so that you can make sure that everyone is compliant to that. You want to look at analysis tools, things like being able to create reports. Excel is one of my favorite tools, and anybody that has ever worked for me will know that I live and breathe Excel reports. I'm always looking at the reports, not just to look at the report, but for that to tell me what is going on with my suppliers, what is going on with my business in general. Am I on track, or are there opportunities for us to do better, or are there things that aren't going well and aren't going to plans so that our metrics are off and then we need to improve those. Communication is very, very important for everyone in the supply chain. It's oral communication, how well you speak on the phone, how well you speak in front of a group, how well you can present, how well you can communicate your thoughts, your ideas, your status of a project to the people that you work with. Written communication is also important. Email is a tool that we all use all day, and some of the email etiquette is crazy. Some of it is very good, and then other people have a different sense of email. So being sure that you're writing correct, clear emails to your stakeholders is very, very important. So that means grammar, that means spelling, that means format, that means making sure you copy the right people and don't copy excess people. There's a lot going on there, and that you're succinct and yet you're comprehensive enough to cover the issues. PowerPoint, Word, Adobe, putting things into PDFs, all of that is very important, and those skills need to be inherent in your team. The financial basics, I say being able to develop cost models with your suppliers. And when you're trying to drive costs down, you really want to look at cost models from your suppliers that tell you where their costs are so that you can work collectively to get better costing for your company without trying just to squeeze a couple dollars out of your suppliers that they're going to come back for next time. You really want to take the cost out and get it out permanently, not just get it out temporarily by squeezing and negotiating really toughly with a supplier. Sometimes that's applicable, but as we talked about before, but not always. Reading financial reports, understanding the conditions of your suppliers, especially if they're small businesses and not publicly traded. If they're publicly traded companies, then you can find their financial reports, but it's important to take a look at those occasionally, make sure that they're in good financial shape. And if not, then you need to be able to ask your suppliers for financial reports. If they are reluctant to give them to you, then there are some ratios that you can ask for. Things like debt to equity ratio, some other ratios that you can look at and ask them for that they're more willing to give you that tell you about the health of their business. And if you'd like more information about that, you can contact me. You need to be able to document a process flow. You need to be able to identify improvements to a process. So those are things that you need to be able to do, whether they're an actual supply chain process, your supplier's process, an external process, working with another stakeholder. All of those things are important. Project management, because much of what we do in supply chain across the board has to do with managing a project. We're getting new projects, new products out. We have new product development going on in almost every country, every company all the time. So you need to be able to participate in that. You have contracts that have project schedules and milestones. We all have due dates. The project that goes into production, which is the actual steps that make up that process, and how does that work? You need to understand how that works, how to get those things managed, and how to get those things completed. Risk identification. We're all learning more and more about risk these days. We want to be able to identify that risk early before there's a big possibility that it's going to happen. Assess the risk in terms of probability of occurrence and then impact of occurrence. Look at ways to eliminate, mitigate, and manage those risks throughout the supply chain, throughout the life of the product, or throughout the contract that you have with a supplier. And then software. We're all getting new software all the time, even if it's just the updated Windows thing that often drives people crazy. There's a new Excel, there's a new PowerPoint. It's almost like the old one, but not quite, and you lose some of the buttons and you lose some of that. So there's software that we're always asked to add to our repertoire of what we can manage. Sometimes it's just a new PowerPoint, other times it's a whole new system. If you are on Oracle and you go to SAP, it's a whole new software and it's a whole new thing to manage. So it can be a very good thing eventually, but sometimes getting there takes a while. Back to this skill that I talk about as teamwork, or those groups of skills. This is very important because none of us work by ourselves. Even myself as a solopreneur now, I still work with clients all the time. I work as a teacher, so I work with students. I work with the hierarchy at the university. All of these things mean we all work with people. There's almost no one on the planet that doesn't have to work and interact with other people in order to get things done. There are a couple of odd roles that you have. You think about the monk on the mountain that's all by himself, but most of us have to deal with a lot of people all day, every day. So here's some of the skills that you need for that. You need to be a good communicator, as we said, but you also need to be an active listener. Part of communication is taking in, not just sending messages out. So it's listening to feedback. It's listening, I say, listening between the words to understand what the meaning is. And it's being able to active listen to suppliers, to your stakeholders, to your management, to actually pay attention to, and from a deep level, to understand what's going on and incorporate that into what you do. You need to be able to influence people, persuade people. We're always working in areas where we have deadlines, where we have some differing priorities or differing thoughts of different perspectives. If you look at today outside of work, you need to be able to influence, persuade, and sometimes keep your mouth shut and not share your ideas So it's important to know those things too. There's a difference between negotiation, compromise, trading, bartering. All of those things apply. And I've had people say, well, we don't barter in business, but you know what? Sometimes you do. Sometimes you trade things off. Well, I can send you my tools if you can do this, or I can send you some material if you'll do this for me. I can change the price if you will do this much work or change this work or whatever. So we do barter sometimes in supply chain. Negotiation is coming to resolution. It is not collaboration, which is a different set. It's a different mindset and a different approach to making an agreement. And compromise sometimes is required because you've got something to do very quickly and you need to make an agreement, and so you're willing to give and take a little bit. Some decisions, as I talked before in a previous dynamic dialogue, compromise is a appropriate way to get an agreement sometimes. So look at those, understand the differences, and don't try the same approach every time, because not every agreement that you're trying to reach is the same. Collaboration, I think, is a skill that needs to be built up in a lot of places. This is that win-win attitude. It takes a little bit longer to come up with an agreement, but at the end, the agreement is really a solid agreement that people support and people will continue to support. So if you have long-term suppliers, long-term relationships that you want to either build, maintain, or sustain, then collaboration is a great tool to look at. And it's a great skill to have. Time management. We all, in operations, I say I love operations because every day is different. Even if I come in with a plan, usually something goes awry and my plan doesn't get completely executed. So being able to manage your time, get the things done that you need to, prioritize, utilize your time efficiently, effectively, productively, all of those are important. It's important to be able to cooperate and to coordinate. We all work, again, a lot of companies today have matrix management where you're reporting to one manager, but you also have 3 other people telling you what to do or asking you what to do or seeking your assistance to get something done. So we need to be able to manage and to work in those environments. In teams, informal teams, you need to understand the roles, make sure that you all have common goals with those teams. Recognize that in a company that you are all on the same team. For many years, I was told by different functions within an organization, well, I'm your customer. And I said, yes, and I'm your customer. And I think we both have the same badge, which makes us really partners. And we are trying to be part of the same team that gets these goals accomplished for our company. So if you think about those things, think about who has what role, what the goals are for the organization. It's very important to make sure those are aligned and that you're covering all of those roles. There's a difference between leadership and management. Teams need both. And if you don't have any leaders, then you have to look for where that leadership can come from. And being a good leader doesn't necessarily make you a good manager. And good managers are not always the best leaders. So it's really great and really appreciated when you can find both of those skills. There's the argument, can you teach one? Can you get better at that? Or are leaders born? And I'm not going to get into that discussion, but those are skills that you can hone no matter where you start from. If you are of the mindset that leaders are born, then you can have leaders that can get better doing that. And if you don't think they're born but they're made, then obviously you can work on that as well. So those are all skills you can improve. Today, more than ever, and even today, sitting here, putting these slides together during the last week, looking at what's going on in the nation, diversity matters. Diversity is important. It's important to embrace diversity, not just gender, race, color, creed, whatever, all of the diversity in an organization, which means differences in people, differences in skills, differences in backgrounds, differences in perspectives. It's very important to be inclusive and try to include all perspectives, all ideas when you're getting a good idea. Diversity helps organizations be stronger and better. So I encourage all of you to embrace that, to look for ways to embrace that and add that to the work that you do every day, every week, all through the year. You need to respect the hierarchy and traditions of your organization, of your company. If you don't have a lot of respect for hierarchies, you don't like bureaucracy, then you probably should not go get a job with the government. If you have a background in military and government stuff, you might not do as well with a company like Google or Facebook that's a lot more fluid, less hierarchy, less tradition, those kinds of things. So I've worked in organizations that are highly structured, defense contractors, and those work well, but you need to, and then I've worked for other companies that were a lot more fluid, tech companies. HP for one, I worked for HP and the dress code was nothing like I had worked in before. Very comfortable, very lax, very, very fluid. And yet they both had strong traditions. They both had a hierarchy, and you just have to learn to work within those. So you have to respect what's there, respect the structure, be able to work within that structure. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't challenge it, want to change it, whatever, but you need to respect what's there. And then stakeholder managing. Managing the people that are your stakeholders, managing the functions that are the people that you need, the organizations that you need to get things done, whether those are internal to your company, external with the freight companies, with your suppliers, with your customer service people, whoever those are, customers, you need to be able to identify stakeholders and manage those stakeholders effectively. Strategic thinking, this is one of the hardest, I think, to capture and to actually try to build skills on. Critical thinking is even a hard term to define. Critical thinking means you're looking at the details and yet you're looking at how that fits into the whole picture. So you're challenging things, you're trying to come up with different ideas. It's an important skill, and we'll see how that relates to some expert thinking in a little bit, but it's a difficult one. Even decision making. Decision making is a strategic skill because you need to know what kinds of decisions need to be made at what point. You need to think about risk-based decision making, risk-based decision making. So how do you make decisions considering the risk every time, every aspect of risk that you can identify? A skill that you can teach, but it's not something that is inherent. Complex decision making, which is more than just a yes or no kind of thing. Yes, I'll sign my name, get that out of here, or I'll approve that PO. It's more detailed than that, and yet it's broader than that. Complex. How do you make decisions when you have incomplete information, which is oftentimes as a manager, you don't have all the information that you would like? How do you sort through piles and piles of data and maybe some reports, try to figure out how the best decision to make is, and how you can make them quickly enough to support the timeline that has to be done within your organization. Consensus is one way to make a decision where everyone agrees with the final outcome. Majority rule, which is how many like A, how many like B. Directive, where the manager says, I'm the manager and you're not, so, or I'm the sergeant, or I'm the officer and you're not, so I'm telling you to do this. And then delegating, when you say, I don't care, you pick what you want to do. You can do this or that. So all of those matter, all of those are good, but not in every instance. So you have to look at the situation and choose the right kind of decision to make, which is part of that complex decision-making, critical thinking, all of those things. And then there's the avoidance decision-making, which is really not making a decision and understanding what the consequences of that are. Part of that is judgment, how you assess things. That's important to be able to do that. Again, a tough thing to teach. Creativity, innovation, in my mind, different skills. Again, very difficult skills to teach. You can enhance someone's creativity. You can support innovation, but these are not things that you can say, okay, we're going to be creative today. or we're going to be innovative today. You have to encourage those kinds of thinking, and there's whole processes that you can do to do that. But you can't just say, okay, here it is, we're going to be creative. There are creative activities that will help you come up with more creative ideas, but these are tough things to teach. Passion, I think, is strategic because you need people with passion for what they're doing. If everyone is just okay about what they're doing, then you don't move forward as quickly or as strongly as if you have some people in the organization that have a passion for what they're doing. To be flexible, agile in your thinking, in your acting, in your ability to move through a lot of different things. Multitasking goes in there. Those are very strategic things, but they are also very difficult things to kind of capture, and how do you teach that? And then visionary, another thing that's hard to teach. How do you create a vision? How do you share that vision? Very, very important skills for an organization to be able to create and communicate a vision so that people understand where they're going, but not really easy to teach. So here's a ranking. An APQC study last year developed this list. So you can see this list has a lot of what I call social soft skills. Teamwork, the set of skills that I just put together as teamwork, 4 of those are on this list. So of these top 10, this is the top 10, then 4 of these fell into that area. Procurement, strategic, business acumen each have 2 in this area. But procurement skills don't show up until number 6 and number 10, which is in the supplier relationship management, and number 9, the traditional negotiation. But the teamwork goes from the stakeholder management, relationship building in general, leadership, and being a team player or teamwork, team members. Those are all important. So those were very, very important to this list of managers that they pulled to create this. But it's interesting that the top 2 have to do with business acumen. Business ethics, so understanding those ethics and being able to work within those ethics are very, very important. And communication, both oral and written. So not only understanding what you're supposed to do and kind of how you're supposed to do it through ethics, but being able to communicate internally and externally were the 2 most important skills that experts said. So this is for supply chain professionals. So even though supply chain is inherent in all of this, those skills fell farther down the list in what they felt like their constituents needed to do. In supplier relationship management, this is a continuum from just very transactional to having really a lot of investment from both parties. When you're collaborating, you might be doing some concurrent engineering, not partnering from the lawyer sense, but partnering from the working together sense, not from a legal perspective as a partner. Or it could be as a partner. If you join up with another company and you have a partner. Could be a merger and acquisition where you put things together and you're trying to do that. So this is from the strategic sourcing in the new economy, harnessing the potential of sourcing business models in modern procurement. So this is, you can see you've got a very basic thing when you're buying things like from Amazon, and you're buying office supplies from Staples or Office Depot, one of those. And then you actually have equity partnership where you both have money invested in equipment, in people, in maybe IP. Joint IP can be in that area. So it's a very broad continuum, and there's a lot of skills that you need to manage supplier relationships all along that. And you need some of those other skills that we looked at to help people do that. So these same 10 skills that I looked at a minute ago, and this chart is a little bit harder to read, but you can see that there are gaps in these. So these gaps came from part of that same analysis. So business ethics, the desire was, this was almost 60% of the people felt like that this was an important skill, but they only felt like 32% of their people had adequate skills in those areas. So that's the way to look at it. The top one is the value of that to the organization and to the people who filled out the survey. And then the bottom one is where they felt that their organizations were on having those skills in place. So that's a huge gap. If you want 60% of the people thought business ethics was the most valuable, and only 32% felt like they had enough of training and enough skills in their organization to do that. Communication, 56%, and again, 20%. So a much smaller number they felt possessed the correct skills for that. Stakeholder management, almost 55% versus 21% have those skills. Relationship building, 52% want that as a very top skill, 21% have that. Critical thinking, 48 versus 14, one of the lower areas in where they felt like their organization had those critical thinking skills. Supplier relationship management, 47%, 20% of the people have that. So that's a telling gap there when supplier relationships are what we do in purchasing all the time. Leadership, 46%, 20%. Complex decision-making, 42%, 11, almost 12%. This is the lowest score in those top 10, complex decision-making. So companies feel that this is about the 8th most important skill, and yet only 12% of their people have those skills. Traditional negotiation, 41% versus 15%. And even being a team player today, where you think that we've all been encouraged to do this for so many years, it's almost a 40% value, and only 25% of the people are perceived to be team players. So the responsibility for skills is shared. It's shared by the manager and the employee. You have to identify the skills, identify the gaps, and try to close those. Once you have those gaps identified, whether you as an individual assess that in yourself that you have a gap, or your manager shares with you that he or she feels that there is a gap there that you should be able to improve on, or you see that in your own organization. But it's not the manager's responsibility solely, and it's not the employee's responsibility solely to improve these skills. You do need senior leadership support and sponsorship to get these skills improved and to close the gaps. One reason, and one of the main reasons, of course, is because that's where the resources and funds are for that. So sometimes it's paying to either hire someone else, to train someone else, get training, but it's also looking for other pockets of skills in the organization where you can share those skills and you can teach other people. You can do mentorships, you can do coaching, you can do lots of different processes to try to improve the skills in your organization. It's also important for senior managers to model the skills and behaviors that they want to see in the organization. If you go back to this list and you see these top things, if your CEO gets booted for ethics issues, it's hard to push ethics in the organization where you had someone at the top who wasn't doing that. So it's very important for these top managers in any organization to model the skills and behaviors that you want to see throughout the organization. And then you also need sometimes the senior managers to help prioritize those. You can say, we have a big gap. Even with this top 10 list here, there's some pretty big gaps. Where do you start? So it's often good to get senior management support, input, and sponsorship on how to prioritize those. So once you use the gap analysis and identify those skills, then you can start to acquire those skills. You need to do that prioritization. What do you need now? What do you need short term? And what do you need long term? The first thing I say is look for in-house resources. So if you need in your, say, procurement organization, if you need more financial skills, go to the finance department and see if you can borrow some people to help train your organization, to come in and give them some tutelage on different aspects, or work with them on things like cost models, make presentations on how your organization does their financial analysis. Anything that you need. If you can find some of the gaps, or if you can find resources inside to help fill some of the gaps, that's a great place to go. Train those people. Don't pick and choose what is easy to do, like sending people to an Excel class. If that's a critical skill, then by all means do that. But don't pick whatever's easiest. Pick what you need based on the need and the gaps to fill in your organization. There are webinars, seminars, consultants. There's any number of things you can do. Some are inexpensive, some are very expensive. So prioritize the sourcing along with the funds that you have, the resources that you have, and the ability that you have to work with these available sources. There's any number of free webinars going on right here. There's seminars and consultants to come in and help things. There's a lot of other ways you can do things. Provide opportunities to apply the learnings. One of the most disappointing things I've done as a manager is to send someone to a workshop and have them come back and not say anything about it, not try to implement any of the things that they learned or whatever. So early on as a manager, when I sent someone to training class, and I tried to make that part of all of my, especially my senior people, part of their annual goals was to attend an outside training class or conference or whatever, was to come back, make a presentation on that, and find a project where they could apply at least part of that. So if you use those learnings from the webinar, from the seminar, from whatever, then you're going to be able to incorporate those. You'll really get those integrated into that person's experience, knowledge base, and they'll be able to do that again. And I also say never underestimate the value of a manager as a coach. As managers, we sometimes are working managers, and so we don't have time to do all that. It's important to coach people to get that coaching from either internally or from other people in the organization. So I have a couple different things for you today. So one of the things I hear is, what happens if we invest in developing our people and they leave? Because I've seen that from managers. Well, we don't want to do this. If we give these people these skills, then they're not going to stay here. But I love this response. What happens if we don't and they stay? So if you have a gap and you don't try to fill it, or you think it'll go away, it won't. And you're going to keep that gap and it's going to get worse. So you don't really want that to happen. It's better to have someone with more skills go on outside and leave and maybe go to another organization, maybe stay within your company and just go to another department. But if you're not helping those people, then you're not building your staff. They're staying, they're not getting any better. And if they're not getting any better, then that's not helping you as a manager either. So the skills for recovery are probably the same skills that you needed pre-COVID. If you look at your organization, there may be a few things that have come up or have been magnified by COVID, but if your organization needs them now, they were probably needed before COVID and just maybe not high on your list. So this gap analysis is worthwhile to do now as well as pre-COVID, and it's worthwhile to do every year, every 6 months. So that's personally as well as in the context of your job as well. So look at where do you need to improve? Maybe you need to improve. For me, it's my office. My office is always stacks of paper. So my organizational skills need to be there. You might have things in your family communication that you would like to improve. You might have other relationships you would like to improve. So it's worthwhile to do the gap analysis. What do I think? What do I need? What would I like to be? And where am I? So it's good to do this for your family, for your home, for your work team, for yourself. Baseline what you need specific to each organization and each role that you have. Maybe you need to be a better person in a voluntary role that you have. Look at what skills you need in order to do that. And I always say honesty is the best policy. Don't be so hard on yourself that you say that you're not good at anything, but also don't tell yourself that you're great at everything, because we're not all great at everything. There's always room for us to improve in one or two areas. So look around, be honest with yourself, and then look around, look at your team, and where can you get that kind of role model? Where can you get some training, some expertise? Where can you get some insights on how to be better at that? So prioritize the skills that you need, borrow the resources, borrow the people from another organization. As a procurement manager, sometimes I would bring finance in once a month or once a quarter to make a presentation to my team about how we needed to do some things for financial reasons, things on inventory, things on margin calculation, things on cost modeling. So borrow those skills that you need if you can. Train people with whatever available training there is. Again, there's lots of training, a lot of it's free and a lot of it's inexpensive. Coach people after they get training or while they're getting training so that that sticks. Read. That's the other thing I say is we forget to read, and we have so many white papers, books, audibles. You can get books on, books on tape, which they're not on tape anymore, but you can get audible books. You can get synopsis of books. You can get books, articles, all kinds of things for very little money. It's not like you have to go buy $30 books all the time. You can lending libraries. So traditional libraries have that, but there are online libraries too, like Amazon has a library that you can get to. Other organizations do that, borrow things. You can go to used bookstores, lots and lots of ways to read. So classes, there are certifications that help build skills, certificates that you can get from local universities or extension programs. There's so many ways to do that. There's no reason that you can't have a plan and can't be executing some things to build skills either in yourself or your organization. And then when you do hire to the plan. So when you say you need this skill, then go hire that skill if you don't have it. Make sure the person that you hire has that skill plus whatever else you need. So when you prioritize that, it really does help you sort through candidates and look for particular things in potential people. So the skills, we all need to keep building those into recovery, past recovery. We don't know what this new normal is going to be, but we know it's going to be different, and there's going to be some skills we all need to improve for that. So here's my final thought. Great things in business are never done by one person. Steve Jobs, who was known to be very arrogant, very confident, overly so, not the best team player, and yet his thought was great things in business are never done by one person. He wanted to be the one being the instigator, but he recognized he needed other people in order to do that. And then in case any of you watched Michael Jordan and I can't remember the name of the series, I didn't watch very much of it, but if you're basketball fans, Michael Jordan says, talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships. So it's great. You can win a game, but we're not here trying to win just the game, right? We're all trying to win this championship of life, of our careers. So talent is important, but teamwork and intelligence is in there too. And sometimes intelligence is just recognizing your gaps and trying to fill those. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. Next week, we're going to do supplier relationships in recovery. We're going to look at the structure of some relationships, leadership required, and some other things. I don't have it all fleshed out yet, so that's why there's only 2 bullets there. But we're doing these free through June, so you're welcome to keep coming back. The link is good for the whole month. And then in July, we're starting a subscription, so we'd like to have some people signing up for that. You can go to the Dynamic Dialogue registration. You can go find that on our website, which is purplelink.co. If you're interested in further discussion, you can set up a 30-minute call with me about working together. That's callwithjane.com, because there's always a better way to reduce the cost and the risk. And we've got some webinars going on and some workshops. So there's a lot of different things that we do. And if you need resources, products from Grady Teskey, he made a presentation. He's going to make another one here in the next few weeks. He's got a PPE finder if you need PPE for your business or for your personal stuff. He's got a lot of ways to find that. And if you put Purple Link in the referral code, you'll get a $25 Amazon card. And Procurement IQ, which is a great organization to do a lot of market research. Carla Danganan is there, and she has a phone number and an email for you. So that's all I have today. Any thoughts? I'm going to stop.